Another Jeeping with Cool Guy video. What else have you got to do with your time? Welcome back to another episode of Jeeping with Cool Guy. Tonight we're going to replace the window hinge, or we're going to put the window hinge back on. Got this all nice and cleaned up and ready to go, painted, primed. Actually, one of the things that I did for a lot of these pieces is I actually powder coated these things white, just because the body is actually painted white. If you're doing black, I recommend doing black or whatever. And the reason I did that is so that I could have a really nice, heavy, durable coating underneath the paint, so that, you know, if you get a rock chip or something like that, it's not going to rust out. The powder coating is so much more durable. Anyways, provided a pretty nice finish. But my point is that when you need to, or you're going to replace the window hinge, the optimal time to do this is when you have everything taken off of your CJ7 body, primarily your dash panel. And the reason behind that is because the 4 holes that apply this hinge to the cowl, so you got 2 holes here, and you got your 2 holes up in here. Now you can see that if you have your dash panel in here, and you're going to have your fresh air intake, your heater box, that accessing this spot up in here is going to be practically impossible. And if you do it on the driver's side, that's even more difficult, because then you have to deal with the wire harness. So the optimal time to do this is when you have the dash panel off, whole body stripped down. Now before we get into actually fastening this thing on, one of the reasons that this rusts out so much is because AMC put the hinge onto the cowl before they painted it. So there really is nothing underneath here other than maybe some primer that got into here, and it's not sealed or anything like that. So, you know, the water coming off the windshield goes right down and it leaks right behind here, and this area rusts out almost, you know, exclusively. Right, with all that said, let's get this installed. You're going to need a few things. 12 pieces in total. Well, 13 including the hinge. Torque bolts. You may or may not be a fan of these, totally get it. But I want to make it look exactly like it was out of the factory. So I ordered a new set of torque bolts, and what I did is I conditioned the metal with some anti-rusting zinc paint. Very light coat. You don't want too much on here. And the last thing, in my opinion, that you want to do is actually put thread locker on this thing, because if you've already taken this off, you know how much of a pain in the butt these things are to take off. So I'm not going to put any thread locker on there. I'm just going to put a little bit, or I've already put a little bit of zinc paint on here, so that'll help seal it up a little bit, be a little bit anti-corrosive. And having painted the hinge with the bolts not in there, I've got a nice coating on the inside of this. You're going to need either a nylon lock nut, I've gone stainless steel with these, and a stainless steel washer, or you can get a stainless steel flange nut, which is what the factory actually put in there, but I'd prefer just to do the stainless steel washer and the lock nut, nylon lock nut, because the problem with the flange nut is either when you put the bolt in, you're either going to screw the flange nut onto the metal and then strip the paint off of the metal because of the flange nut, or you're going to strip off the paint off of your nut, your bolt as you put it into, so that's kind of why I've gone this route. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the top outer bolt, because really, in my opinion, that's kind of like the hardest one to get to. Careful when you slide these things in, the bolts in, and when you're fastening these things, tightening them down, because these have a habit of moving around because the holes in the body are bigger than the bolts themselves to give you a little bit of adjustment room. But if you're not careful, you will strip the paint off of that inner part. Take your washer, put it over the top of the bolt, take your lock nut, flange nut, whatever nut you actually wind up using. And then if you are using the torque bolts, you're going to need a T40 torque head, and the nuts for these torque bolts are 5/16. So then you'll need a socket. I put mine on an extension just so I can get in there pretty well. Now the reason I'm starting with this top one here is because it's actually the hardest one to get to from what I've experienced. So I'm going to tighten this down from the inside using the 5/16 inch head instead of using the torque bolt and tightening the torque bolt down. It's because in all honesty I'd rather have the paint strip or get stripped off from the inside than the outside. Now you don't want to tighten these things all the way down. You just want it enough to where you can get you just want it just to where the hinge won't just flop around in there. The reason that you don't want to tighten it down just yet is because when you actually put on your windshield and attach this, you might have to move this around 1/16 of an inch just to get all the alignment right. Because when you put your windshield on and try and get it aligned right and your hard doors, you have to adjust all of these things. So get them just tighten enough to where it's a little bit beyond hand tight, and that's about it. All right, now I'm going to move on to the next most annoying bolt to get in. When you're putting this on, you'll notice that some of the bolts don't line up, the holes don't line up as well as they should. So that's why you don't want to tighten this thing down also beyond finger tight, because it makes it a lot easier to get all these bolts aligned in. Then take your washer and nut and tighten down. Alright, in, done. Let me point something out to you real quick before this video is over. This little hole right here, right at the top of your window hinge. This is your oil hole. Once a month, give or take, you just want to drop 3-in-1 oil, maybe a touch of WD-40 down in there. Take the bolt out of the back of the windshield frame and just kind of rotate it. That way it keeps all of this from rusting up like it was on this Jeep. I think it was the driver's side hinge actually snapped off right here because this thing had rusted all the way through and I couldn't get it off. So that was kind of unfortunate. But to prevent that, make sure you keep it oiled. So this is basically looking up from the floor pan, passenger side, up into that cavity. You can see the 4 bolts, how they're all kind of mounted in there. Just kind of wanted to show you what our end result was. And there you have it, folks. You've survived another episode of Jeeping with Cool Guy. Fairly simple, straightforward video, but I just wanted to show you some of the nuances that go with the windshield hinge before you install yours. I do want to point out one thing that I have heard on a lot of the different forums, is that having a really nice window frame, original window frame, is rare. And they're very hard to come by. There's a few companies out there that make a fairly decent one. The cheaper ones, the ones that you see with the 2 ribs that go all the way across, I've heard various things that the alignment's really difficult and sometimes they don't line up with the hinges as well. So just keep that in mind if you have to get another windshield frame, that you definitely don't want to tighten these things down too tight, because you might have to make some pretty good adjustments when you put on your new window frame. Public service announcement. Subscribe. Like and subscribe. Or dislike. Any one of the 2. Helps me out, helps the Jeeping community out, helps the CJ7 community out.